This is our second panel, and this panel will focus on case studies for successful broader impacts. And we have 4 speakers for this panel. We're going to really abbreviate the introductions to move this along, and then we're going to roll into more conversation after this panel. And because we have such abbreviated time, I've already asked our panelists, and they have graciously agreed to answer any questions that you have. And Holly mentioned she's going to be leading one of the tours of the ISE after this, so you can ask any questions along the tour as well. Okay, so I'm just going to hand it right over to Jason to get started.
So we're all going to be very brief so we can take time to answer questions. I'm going to speak just for a few minutes about the setup of the broader impacts at our center. So Ohio State's Byrd Center is almost 60 years old. Interdisciplinary center set up at Ohio State to do polar research originally. We've expanded since then. We added the Byrd name when we acquired the archival papers from the Byrd family when he and his wife passed away. So we do have a pretty vast collection of archives for polar exploration. And then climate was added to our name 3 years ago. And we're still catching up with becoming the nexus for all the climate work on campus. So you can imagine as soon as we did that, my broader impacts work expanded tremendously because we have a lot more departments involved than we did before. I always like to frame what my job involves currently. So I do center-wide broader impacts. We get a request from thousands of people every year for tours and public speakers and programs. So my position was actually created long before I began, probably about a decade ago, just to try to go ahead and handle the workload because the amount of requests for stuff was overwhelming, and NSF at that point was just discussing a broader impacts requirement. The position was made full-time 6 years ago when I started because NSF had made it mandatory, and our director was kind of looking ahead to the horizon and seeing that broader impacts are going to be coming across the board in all of the funding agencies, and so they created my position. So that means I'm a PI or co-PI or senior personnel on a lot of the projects that we submit for doing the broader impacts of all of our 8 research groups, the Polar Rock Repository, our archival program. And in a former life, I was a high school science teacher for the first 11 years of my career. There aren't a lot of those on campus, not a lot of people that know standards and assessments, so I get called in sometimes the 11th hour when people are having crises on broader impacts to try to triage. So that's created a whole demand outside of the PIs that work in our center for helping people just have conversations and figure out where they can go. And then the last 4 years we've started to undertake some of our own projects, and this is a full range of stuff from NSF-funded initiatives all the way to my team's leading the climate adaptation plan for the city of Columbus. So we work in public policy, and a lot of that is because the state climatologist is also in our facility, but has no funding. So we do a lot of the work to try to get their message out, to secure funding and to secure connections with them to state government. That has resulted in things like a colleague who has a 50% extension appointment, and that's allowed him to handle some of our outreach to the agricultural community. As far as funding, about 55%, and this ebbs and flows in any given year, is from the overhead of the center. About 35% is NSF, and about 10% is OSU grants or foundational funds, and this can be local foundations or national foundations that we do work in. I wanted to take and kind of outline what these 3 areas look like, so I'm just going to take a minute on each one. This is what I was largely thought I was hired to do, although things have expanded tremendously. We do have rock boxes we send out across the country to any educator that's doing teaching about rocks. So this is from our Polar Rock Repository. We house the NSF collection of samples brought back from polar regions. You can see in the lower left tours that come through our buildings. COSI, I know people here from COSI, the middle ones depicting some programs we do in the public with science festivals that go on throughout central Ohio. We have a lot of dignitaries come through, so we have the largest collection of mountain ice in the world. As you can see, we actually have a Vatican official come through at the top. On a speaking tour, we've had a number of politicians come through, people from Hollywood. And then, since we have the archive, we also we have a videographer who works with us, and we've done feature-length film. So this is from the Byrd video that was collected on the 1932, 33, 34 expedition to Antarctica. That was my job probably for the first 3 years. But then we started to get more requests for even more specialized broader impacts as we started to show what the full scope of what we could do is. So I took one example of a colleague of ours in School of Earth Sciences putting together a career grant, not specifically polar focused, but doing work with corals. And my typical way of operating is to bring in a PI and really have a long form conversation or go to their lab and unpack what are they doing, what are they interested in, what are they already very strong and that may not be aware of. This individual was really struggling because the work's a bit esoteric. So it's maybe a little more difficult to convey the coral work and how it connects to larger systems and some of the drilling work that they're doing. The interesting thing was the PI didn't even realize they had had previous work at their former institution with active learning environments and flipped classrooms. And they never thought about that being packaged in. So we started this conversation about a class, and in the meantime, she also was interested in service learning. And so figuring out how we could use that class, embed some of the work with kind of a new model and using a new facility we're building on campus for teaching classes in geosciences, and also go ahead and have students involved in service learning and collaborating with a partner organization in Columbus. So the graphic on the right actually is my family. There's a giant children's outdoor space that's been added to the conservatory in the city, and they do 1 day a month free for the public. And this is making sure it's accessible to anybody who lives in Franklin County. But the problem is they're having so many people show up, they don't have volunteers, and they're struggling for activities. Well, and it's designed to focus on the outdoors, things in nature. So it's very easy for us to couple a service learning class with delivering activities to go to them that their volunteer corps could go ahead and we could field test them that they could then permanently use. So it's a perfect relationship, but knowing what those community partners and what the PI was interested in allowed me to marry up those ideas. Last example I wanted to point out is something that started. We do a lot of work in the ag community, as I mentioned. We had some visualizations that were off the shelf that we found ourselves taking out and using and that were very effective with the agriculture community. They're focused on weather and they're intimately aware and taking measurements, oftentimes with Coco Ross and Volunteer Corps. They're very reticent to climate change information. But if you strike up the right conversation, we were using a product to help explain El Nino, and they were walking away saying, I get it. They'd sit there and talk to us for 15, 20 minutes, and they'd say, I understand it now, thanks for that. And they'd walk away. But we realized a lot of the off-the-shelf components didn't allow you to really convey information and have people explore on their own. So Aaron Wilson is shown on the right. He's the colleague of mine who's now an extension educator. So we went ahead and started to use this in so many venues, but it was a difficult product that we decided to put our own NSF proposal together. So this is a collaborative venture with the outreach group at the Byrd Center and our polar meteorology group, who happened to have the coders who knew the data sets and could build the code. And we partnered with our school of communications, who has a user testing expert who does VR and product testing, and our Ohio Supercomputing Center, and we produced what we're calling Fluid Earth Viewer. If you'd like to check it out, this is the dev server right now. So this is if you hit that site, you'll end up going to the version's being tested right now for dissemination. We have this update coming out, but it allows you to look at what's happening in the oceans and atmosphere anywhere in the world. So it isn't just country specific. And the goal is it bridges this divide in informal learning between teaching basic phenomena about the atmosphere and then looking at where it's happening around the globe. But we're also looking for partners soon to field test this in other settings that are formal education. And this was just a result of our collaborations we'd had and all these other conversations leading up to a new product that was really an outreach-focused initiative. So I always like to tell people my 5 takeaways over the last 6 years. Keep an eye out for collaborations. A lot of the collaborations and partnerships I had weren't obvious when they started, and they've just naturally bloomed from massive whiteboards I have in my office that are filled up with all these project partners, and I consider my job largely a matchmaker, trying to matchmake good ideas. Broader impacts that are mutually beneficial. Things don't have to be forced, and they really shouldn't be, so figuring out what that team is that you can construct to deliver more. Find someone within each group. A lot of the people that I work with the most are grad students and postdocs because they have more time, they're really passionate, they realize this is important for the career. Many see it as a creative outlet, and so that's my go-to people. Balancing novelty with sustainability. Being somebody out of a classroom, I really was frustrated by anything that didn't have the ability to live beyond its short lifetime, so I'm always looking for stuff that can be sustained. And then the challenge all of us face with limited time is how do you keep within budget and time frame, not to try to do something that's amazing, but not burn yourself out at the same time. So that's my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
All right, moving right along on the case studies. So we had a discussion before to plan out, and I just tried to think about what are interesting projects to highlight here. Our group does a lot of different work, and we do some polar, some Arctic, a lot of climate work. So I pulled a few examples of the work we've done in the last few years. And so the first one is also a career education component that similar to what Jason just talked about. So again, I'm the director of the Series Education Outreach Group. Series is a NOAA Cooperative Institute, and so we have 850 scientists in Boulder that we serve, and they can come to us and talk to me about what they want to do for broader impacts. And so we do some support for for scientists, working with them on their education components, but we also write our own grants and bring in funding that's all kind of in the mission of what the science that's been done in our institute. So the reason why I picked this example is that I'm a climate scientist by training. I'm really interested in measuring impact and getting, not just doing one more project, but really thinking about how can we advance the field. And we always try to get publications out of our projects and that's really appealing to the scientists in our institute to say, okay, I'm actually getting some publications out, it's something real, and it's not just people like it and had a good time. And so in developing this plan with this early career scientist, she was interested in polar bears, and we talked about what are the components that we could do, and so we are researching whether or not polar bears are effective hooks in teaching about climate. Is that something that allows you to break through these barriers? And so it's just an example and a reminder. If you talk to scientists, what's really been effective for us is thinking research. And I can talk more about this project in detail. I think my point was really, it's been very appealing to bring in the research and the measurement of the impacts. We use some hand sensors to measure engagement here. Another project that is an ITES-funded project that our group does, where we are providing opportunities for early career scientists to be mentors, is the Lens on Climate Change project, where students create short films around how climate change impact their lives. And it's a great way for us to connect with the science community to say, here, these are mentoring opportunities. We provide the program structure. You come in here, we help you in your professional growth. We also provide, obviously, the broader impact of your science, but it's a safe environment. The time investment is fairly limited from any of the grad students that work with us or early career faculty. So that's another example where we are driving the project and we are just putting opportunities out there to connect. Another opportunity, and I'm just throwing some examples here, I could talk very long about all these, is that we've developed a MOOC, massive open online courses. And the way MOOCs are often driven, and you probably all have heard about the spirit of a MOOC, is really this equity approach that the best education should go out to everyone and be accessible. We've kind of flipped it around a little bit and said it's not me. I'm like the instructor in the MOOC or co-instructor, but it's actually not me delivering the lecture. So we get out there and bring research faculty, and we had 17 different research faculty say, tell us everything you know about, I don't know, tribal connections or tribal connections with water in the Western US. Or what's the energy climate nexus? Talk about fracking. And we script very heavily with them. It takes quite a bit of time. They have to write a script for their 15-minute lecture, and we really heavily vet the content, and then we have a professional filming setup. But it's not that much time, and it's really fun for scientists to get their work out. So we, again, facilitate, bring in these experts together, and we provide like the assessment around it and the structure and some intro classes. But that's another way to effectively reach and connect with scientists. Another project I just wanted to put out there, because it's been around for a long time, the Climate Literacy and Energy Awareness Network, CLEAN, has been around since 2010. A number of people in this room are connected with the network. It's award-winning. We just got another award a couple of weeks ago from the Golden Foundation. It's a collection initially funded by NSF, now for many years funded by NOAA, that puts out peer-reviewed educational resources. So anyone who develops resources here in the room, that's a quick plug for you to connect with us, that we can possibly feature your resources. And we do have huge web statistics now. We have about 30,000 hits a month, so we really get resources out there. And the interest that NOAA has in funding this is we are actually the official collection. If you go to climate.gov, Teaching Climate site, we're providing the resources there. Why I've featured this here, in addition to plugging it for any of you to connect with us, is that it's a way for scientists to get connected and say, I do a little bit of outreach, because they can be reviewers. They can say, oh, I want to do a little bit of educational support, and everything that goes in the collection has to be reviewed by scientists, among other people. And my last quick project that I wanted to say, it's an NSF Broader Impacts project where we connected, and this is a formal education setting, but scientists came to us and said, oh, I don't know what to do about broader impacts. And so we worked with them to actually take their Arctic data they collected in Barrow and wrote a curriculum around it. And again, we wrote a paper about the process of curriculum development in collaboration between scientists, curriculum developers, and educators. So, and an education workshop, but I think this appealing to the data and talking to scientists and saying, here, give us your data, and we tell you how we translate it to the science has been working really well for us. Something that was mentioned earlier is the Mosaic expedition. Brad mentioned it briefly when he talked about the Polarstern exhibit. And I just wanted to put a plug in here for all of us that are polar educators. Mosaic stands for Multidisciplinary Drift Observatory for the Study of the Arctic, and is a big research expedition that's launching September of 2019. There's 17 nations are part of this expedition. There's in a nutshell, the Polarstern is going to be frozen in the Arctic Ocean, and it's going to drift around the North Pole for a year, and there's going to be a lot of different science happening on 7 legs of this expedition. And I'm working with the German Alfred Wegener Institute on the coordination of the education component. So NSF has provided a lot of funding from the US side, the Department of Defense, and Department of Energy, and NASA, and we are trying to pull all these small broader impacts components where they say, I'm going to go to my elementary school and give a talk. And we're going to try to scale a little bit and say, how can we make the impact of Mosaic more than the sum of all the small pieces? So there's going to be a lot of opportunities, and yeah, talk to me more about Mosaic if you're interested. Okay, so I'll actually have to leave today, and so if you want to talk to me, let's talk later today or send me an email.
I'll just start with an apology for my slides. I'm not a very good slide maker, and this isn't my normal venue, so oh, I don't know how to, it's not on here.
Sorry.
Escape.
All right.
This is yours, right? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so with 8 minutes, I'm going to skip talking much about the project itself. I uploaded the full participant report and the executive summary to the Google Drive, so you can look through in there and see every single affiliation that I'm going to talk about in the broader impacts. You can read all of those things. I'm just putting this up there right now because instead of listening to me, you'll read this, and this is just giving you a sense of when the project happened. And the point is, the driving question for the project was what is required for healthy, sustainable communities in Arctic Alaska by 2040. And This gives you an idea of the participants. There were more than 48 participants. These are all the affiliations. So instead of getting into specifics, I just want you to, my broader impacts aren't to educators and classrooms. My broader impacts are across the state of Alaska, basically, because the whole goal is to create policy throughout the state at different scales that's going to allow for anticipatory governance, right, that's going to allow for changes to be made, getting ahead, hopefully, of some of the climate change impacts that we know are happening. So these gives you an idea. For those of you not familiar with Alaska, we don't have a reservation system. We have an Alaska Native Corporation system, which I'm happy to explain at length. But when it has ANCSA, this is the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act regional nonprofit. These are the Alaska corporations that serve our Alaska Native population instead of reservations. And then below, that's pretty obvious. Instead of saying county, we say borough, just to give you a sense. So this is the complicated way I tried to figure out how the singular project had broader impacts. And he gave me a pointer. So I'll just be brief. I have a whole backstory slide, but it's not here. So I'll just start with here that myself and Hayo Aiken were in a scenarios workshop hosted by Minerva, which is lightly affiliated, or was at that time, with the Air Force. We then decided to, in a professional development setting, offer a course on scenarios. At the same time, my interests in community-level resilience, in particular for remote, rural, and largely indigenous communities, was evolving. And the Northwest Arctic Borough, which is the borough to the left of the North Slope Borough, had a Healthy Communities Initiative, which was very holistic and very broad and forward-thinking. And so Hayo and I, and then also with my spouse, applied for an ArcSeas grant. I don't know if you remember when those were out. They were relatively vague, so we thought, all right, we're going to do something radical with scenarios that engages only Arctic residents and not stakeholders. And we're going to ask them specifically what they think the most important key factors are to have healthy, sustainable communities by 2040. And you can read healthy and sustainable as a proxy for resilience. My background also meant that I wanted to ensure that these were completely deliberative forums. So while we didn't have co-production of the grant itself, we drew already in the creation of the grant from existing efforts, for example, like the Northwest Arctic Borough. And we wanted to ensure that while we were a large interdisciplinary team, there were 11 of us from UAF doing this, including 4 of my PhD students, that we were not in any way telling the resident experts themselves what to do. So the very first broader impact is, in fact, bringing together the resident experts. So if you've done community level work anywhere, as you know, you start calling and you call and you call and you email, and your ideas, right, start permeating through the different networks. And if you read the earlier slide, right, we were interested in people across multiple sectors of the community, so justice, health, people who often, even though the communities are very small, don't actually talk to each other or work much with each other. So how does law enforcement work with high schools, for example? They don't, in a general. So the first broader impact was the actual process of bringing together these resident experts, which was very exciting to help them make intra-community connections themselves. Then we held the 3 workshops. So in that sense, the second broader impact was that the workshops were held, which is why this price tag is so high, by the way. That price tag is so high because nobody was excluded based on cost. In other words, anybody who was identified as an Arctic resident expert could participate and would be fully funded. So the price tag is for that kind of travel, you know, which is very expensive in the Arctic. It's hardly tied to salaries or remuneration or anything. Because we wanted the workshops to be in then Barrow, Utqiagvik, and in Kotzebue so that they were seen by the communities and that we were building trust relationships. So two of the areas where now what I'm understanding is informal science education, right? We had public events at the Nupiat Heritage Center and in the Kotzebue Youth Center, where we had raffles. You know, one of the things you do often is you raffle off food boxes, you raffle off bicycles for kids, getting the community excited and interested in what you're doing. So that broader impact then comes to 2 of these here that were side effects of our work. One was that I was invited to work with, so this is Arctic Council, AMAP, Adaptations for a Changing Arctic, the Bering, Chukchi, Beaufort region. So I wrote with Ben Preston. We were the lead authors for a major chapter specifically explaining why scenario work is good in the Arctic, why it's valuable. So if you've ever done one of these reports, you know they're these multi-year big deals. Another side effect was that my spouse, who works with high school students and teachers, he received funding from the Northwest Arctic Borough's own Science Commission to do a version of the scenarios project specifically with high school students. And we were able to pull in 22 students. Every single school, high school in the Northwest Arctic Borough was represented. And we didn't ask for it, but coincidentally, all the students who came to Kotzebue for their workshop were Indigenous. So very interesting to be able to compare the outputs of those two, but that's academic. So if we come up here, right, the fourth broader impact was returning, right? So we went back after the participant report and results were made available, and that includes by results every single piece of data that was collected. So, you know, all of the work you do on the boards, or not boards, what are those called? Those tear-off sheets, you know, where everybody does that, all the sticky notes, everything was documented photographically so that nobody who wanted to take a look at this and use it later would have to recreate the wheel. So we saved and documented everything and made all of that available. So that happened. I presented then on both Arctic scenarios and on our results at ArcticNet in 2017, which led to a sixth broader impact, and that is I was asked to teach in One Health. If you're not familiar with One Health, right, it's this new holistic, greatest big idea, right, to bring together human, animal, society, relationships. And so there's going to be a master's degree, so this is educational, but I'm going to actually be able to teach a class in scenarios that's directed towards how you think about the future and get out ahead of the future by working with policymakers, being an advocate for your community, integrating Indigenous knowledge. So that was this broader impact. Then we pop up here, broader impact 7 is the scenarios work because I'm came on to search, rotated on to search, or was elected, I guess we're elected onto search. We're going to design, or we are designing, right, our big State of the Arctic meeting to have a futures focus. And then we did another workshop with very high-level people like Aleka, you know, from Denmark, and people from NSF, Wilson Center, as well as like the mayor of Kaktovik and others. So we ran a scenarios workshop as a side-along to the Arctic Encounter workshop down in Seattle, right? That'll be presented in ArcticNet. And then the very last sort of impact is that now I'm the director for the Center of Arctic Policy Studies. And so that will not only be pushing out, right, lots and lots of information to decision makers, so both political officials, their staffers, right, but also agency people, as well as hopefully, right, private industry. And that's broader impacts from one. So those are the broader impacts, like from one single NSF grant. Okay. What do I do? Escape? Free?
I got it. I'll time myself too.
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So my name is Holly Morin. We have the last person who speaks the fastest. That's not a bad thing, I guess, if we're short on time, but I'll try to keep myself slow. I am a marine biologist and education specialist at the Inner Space Center here at URI GSO. And I am taking this opportunity to talk about the Northwest Passage project, to which I was acting in the capacity of the expedition lead out on board the vessel. I know Gail mentioned yesterday that myself and then Don Glide, who's up in the back, were actually on board the boat when the incident happened a couple of months ago. But I did want to take this opportunity to dive a little deeper, talk more about our partnerships, the model that we're using, and give you a little bit more about the project, besides the fact that we unfortunately ran aground in August. So the participants, we have a wide swath of folks that we're engaging through the project itself. The goals, I know Gail touched on them yesterday. You want to remember that we're trying to interface between scientists and students. We're highlighting the science that's being conducted in the Arctic. We're also looking at increasing informal science education institutions, their understanding of public engagement with these interactive broadcasts, what we do. And so a lot of these goals are being achieved by having this wide swath of individuals that are involved in the project itself. So the scientists we had on board, we had atmospheric and ocean chemistry scientists. So Max is here from UIC, and so we had his graduate student, one of their grad students on board, doing atmospheric chemistry work, looking at methane and stable isotopes in the atmosphere. And then Bryce Luce was our biogeochemist that was from here at GSO, and he again was looking at methane isotopes in the ice and seawater. From a physical oceanography side, we had the Virginia Institute of Marine Sciences, represented by Dr. Donglai Gong, and he was looking at Arctic circulation. One of the goals was to actually deploy a glider in the Northwest Passage, if possible. Biological oceanography was being well represented as well. We had a Byrd survey that was going to be contributing to historical data that's run by the Canadian Wildlife Service. But we also had plankton work that was going to be conducted using equipment and methods with a grad student and our researcher Kevin Boswell at Florida International University. And then I got to wear the token marine mammal hat because my background is actually working with marine mammals. Did work in Alaska with sea lions and have a fisheries and whale background as well, so it was fun to be able to wear that hat when I could. The students were engaging a wide swath of students, so graduate students, undergraduate students. We had an Inuit early career scientist on board, as well as our high school students that were here and resident at the ISC. The undergraduate students, we had 5 minority serving institution or MSI partners. So those are listed here. So City College of New York, Virginia Commonwealth University, Florida International University, University of Illinois Chicago, and then California State University Channel Islands. And then we also had our informal science education institution partners, so the Exploratorium in California, Smithsonian Natural History Museum, Alaska Sea Life Center, and then last but not least, we had our partner David Clark Film Company, our production company. He was actually producing, or will be producing, a 2-hour documentary that's not only filming and discussing the changes that are happening in the Arctic, but also documenting the journey and experiences of our scientists and students on board the vessel. And then the ISC had their video capabilities as well. So when you're talking about the major activities that all these participants were involved with, there was science engagement. This was key. Again, making the connections between scientists and students and having the students work side by side with the scientists on board the vessel, conducting the research while at sea. But before we did that, we had webinars, which is something that my colleague Chris Knowlton will talk more about later on. But webinars, not only are they for science content instruction, but they also an opportunity for face-to-face communications ahead of an expedition before we all got on the boat. And the high school students were also able to participate in webinars as well. So again, it's a way to virtually meet your participants as well as get some science content. The students were going to be involved in, or will be involved in, immersive research. The way we had that set up was that the graduate students were actually leading individual science teams. We had a very extensive science plan that was vetted and had all the necessary permits associated with it as well. But they were basically rotating on a daily schedule, per se, between different science activities as well as broadcast activities, and also having some downtime while they were on the vessel as well, which is important. But they would have one area of science that they themselves were focusing on, so we had 4 science groups, but they would also get to rotate through the other activities so they could get a flavor for all of the science that was being conducted while we were at sea. And then for the high school students, you can see here, this is some of the activities that they were working on during their hands-on institute here at GSO. The other important thing was not only were they getting science content instruction, meeting with scientists here at GSO, but they were also getting exposure to the telecommunications or telepresence side of things that we do here at the ISC. Which brings me into sharing the science, which was another important part, or is an important part of the Northwest Passage project. Something that Valentine actually said yesterday morning really resonated, where you want to share that scientists are actual real people. They're not just these interesting individuals that are out there doing something. And that their science is important and that it's exciting. And that was something we want to accomplish with these types of activities that are happening through the project itself. So we have the telepresence activities. These are our interactive broadcasts. There were 30 of them planned with our ISC institutions. This was going to be a 30-minute interactive broadcast where I would have been the host, or I will be the host on board the boat. And we'll be talking about the different science activities that are being conducted on the vessel, and then we would also hopefully have a student. We were going to be looking at the students that were shining with regards to production capabilities, bring them on board as co-hosts, and then also bring the scientists in, again, to make sure people know that the scientists are real people and we're engaging the public and sharing the science with them in that fashion. We're also doing telepresence connections with the high school students, which you can see kind of in the upper right-hand corner there, where we're doing connections now where we're bringing our activities into other classrooms beyond their own. So another way to broaden that impact. The other way that we were broadening the reach of the science being conducted while we were up in the Arctic, there were daily highlight posts on the Northwest Passage website, which I know is tiny down there in the bottom. It's northwestpassage.org. I should have put the website address, the URL up there. But there were going to be blog posts that were updated every day, as well as video highlights. So a way to keep up to date and follow along with the expedition. The students were going to be blogging. They would be writing about their experiences, what they're working on, what their feelings were that day, what was exciting to them. We also had a pretty significant social media presence between Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. This was actually one of my Facebook posts on the right there. The Northwest Passage Project posts were being posted through the Inner Space Center social media platforms. We didn't have our own platform for the project. It was going out through the ISCs. But we did see a significant boost in all of our activity. For the sake of time, wasn't going to put those statistics up here, but it was very successful in that sense. And then there, of course, was the documentary that's being produced, and there are post-expedition activities where we would have screenings of the documentary, where the students became ambassadors at their institutions, sharing their experiences, and then also hosting the screenings for other people that might be interested on campus and in the surrounding community. So all of these different activities were reaching a very wide audience, but also, if you can imagine, significantly broadened the reach of just beyond the science that was happening on board the boat. We were engaging multiple audiences in different ways with all of these different participants, and I will say it's a lot of moving pieces. It was something that had to be very well organized. Kudos to Andrea, actually, who's our project manager for MPP, that you really need to have that in place when you have a project of this nature and that size, that having a well-organized plan and open communications is very important to seeing things move forward, and I think our team has actually done that very successfully from the beginning. We have done similar projects, as to say, and I know a video is going to go on the bottom, and it's wicked fast. That's my New Englandese coming out in me, but that was for a lightning talk, so it goes really quick to keep up with me, and sounds are going to come out with it too. But that's an interactive iBook that we've made for the Discovery of Sound in the Sea project. We've done websites, those are whistles, other telepresence activities, which we can talk about more over at the Inner Space Center. Has everybody ever actually, do we know what telepresence is? Raise your hand if you know what telepresence is. Okay, good, so mostly everybody here, fantastic. These are fish. Sorry, I didn't realize the sounds. They play in the book too, so now we know you can hear it. We've made short science videos. We've done something for Science on a Sphere. We've worked with students before. This is actually the URI Honors Program. Students out on board the Endeavor. A very similar type of concept to what we do for MPP, where you have students doing the research alongside with scientists, and then we had interactive broadcasts from sea as well. So all of these different things, happy to talk to people further about, but again, for the sake of time, just wanted to give you guys a glimpse into the different activities we do through the IC and for MPP as a whole.
And we are completely out of time. So I guess we will just do a short round of applause for our panelists, and you can ask any questions later. Thank you. Sorry about that.